The following program is an OCAmedia community-produced episode of Oregon Life. We would like to thank our sponsors, the Oregon Brooklyn Optimist Club and the Oregon Freemasons. We are proud to have you as our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Eckard-Lee, and I'd like to welcome you to the Kelch Aviation Museum in Brodhead. We're a very small museum at a very small airport, but we are world famous, and I'm going to tell you why. Come on. So you might wonder why vintage airplanes and why Brodhead, Wisconsin. Well, we focus on the golden age of aviation, which is the era between the world wars. We only have civilian aircraft that people, normal people like you and me or Amelia Earhart would have flown. In fact, we have many airplanes right here in the collection that are just like the ones she would have learned to fly in, which I will be showing you. And you might wonder why the 20s and 30s. At that period in the United States, we as independent designers, not just the military, were coming up with things that broke records and changed design, and those design changes and records still influence us today. So we have biplanes, we have monoplanes, and we have free admission. So if you like aviation, if you like history, if you're just bored looking for something to do, come and visit us. We're open 5 days a week right here in Brodhead, and we have movie nights, and we have free ice cream socials, and we have flying festivals. So if you'd like to see these airplanes in action and kind of travel back in time, here's the place to do it. Let me show you the collection. Welcome to the showroom. This is the night hangar, and we have, I think, 13 airplanes on display right now, but in our collection we have over 20. So we're always playing what I call musical airplanes and shuffling things around. If you come today and see something, you might see something different the next time you visit. So maybe you have heard of Charles Lindbergh. He was a very, very famous pilot, and I think that today it's hard to understand exactly why he was so famous. He flew over the Atlantic Ocean, first guy to do that. Today we fly over the Atlantic Ocean 100 times a day, but we don't fly all alone with no radio, no GPS, no way of talking to the ground, and an engine this big. This is a Wright J5 engine. It has 9 cylinders for you engine nerds, and this is exactly the same engine that Charles Lindbergh had on the Spirit of St. Louis when he crossed the Atlantic from New York to Paris in 33.5 hours in 1927. So if you imagine flying over the ocean with just this powering you, that's a very different thing than flying across the ocean today. Now Charles Lindbergh, and here he is in one of our airplanes. One of the reasons he was such a great pilot is he was an airmail pilot before he became famous. And airmail was invented in 1918 in the United States. It was flown in airplanes like this, open cockpit biplanes, so we bundled up for the weather. If you see the leather helmets and the goggles and the white scarves that are the classic aviator things, those are not just fashionable, but they're very practical for warmth. Leather helps block the wind. The goggles keep the wind, but also like oil out of your eyes. And the white scarf is for wiping off your goggles, and then you can see what color the oil is. And if it's a different color, it might not be oil, and then you might have a different problem. This is Wild Bill. He was an airmail pilot in the 1920s. In his career, he had dozens of forced landings. That sounds really scary. It's not actually a crash. It just means you land when you don't plan to land. And we still have those today, and they're perfectly fine. But this was a time where flying the mail meant forced landings. It meant flying an airplane without being able to talk to the ground. This is a replica of an airmail bag. So back in the 1920s, starting in 1918, the United States was like, we should have airmail. It would be so much faster than mail in a train. At the time, sending a letter from coast to coast in the United States took about a week on the train, and this was like super fast. And then some people came along and were like, airplanes would be faster. But when you look around at the airplane technology at the time, this was rickety little biplanes made of fabric and wood. They couldn't fly at night. You couldn't talk to the ground. They only went at most 100 miles per hour. They didn't hold a lot of fuel, so it didn't seem very efficient. But over the next 10 years, from 1918 to 1928, we came up with tons of design changes and, more importantly, infrastructure changes all around the United States that allowed for the delivery of mail eventually overnight. And at a time when there were very few electric lights, when there were no airports, when the whole world was not at all set up even for cars to cross the country, having overnight airmail was a crazy idea. But using beacon towers that were like a dot-to-dot system of lights along the airmail routes, pilots could fly at night and in foggy weather. And then we started to develop radio technologies, just the very beginnings of those in the 30s. And that is eventually, of course, what led to us being able to have things like GPS and Amazon Prime. So without these pilots, over 100 years ago, we wouldn't have the services we have today. One of the coolest legacies left over from the golden age of aviation is film history. And we can see these airplanes in action like at the time they were brand new. So after the Lindbergh boom in 1927-28, Hollywood came calling and wanted to make movies about airplanes because Hollywood knew that they would be very popular. So a ton of airplanes were made in the 20s, silent movies, and in the 30s, not silent movies, talkies. And one of the key important parts of Hollywood's movies about airplanes are the stunt pilots. So the Hollywood stunt pilots did crazy things before there were any CGI effects. So they did often crash airplanes. They did very, very dangerous things. Many of them were killed in the line of duty, so to speak. And my favorite might be Dick Grace. He was a stunt pilot in the 20s, and he wrote this memoir called I Am Still Alive, which I think it spells it all. The introduction to the book is by William Wellman, who is a really famous Hollywood director who you may have heard of, but also he happened to be a pilot in World War I, so he made a lot of movies about airplanes. And here we have a piece of Hollywood history. This is a wing, uncovered, but carefully glossed and restored for display. And this is a wing from a travel air biplane, and travel air biplanes were used a lot in the 30s, in the 20s and 30s, to represent Fokkers and other World War I airplanes because they could be dressed up, painted and disguised, and believably look like one of those airplanes. So this is a wing that was in many movies. It was owned by the Tallmance movie stunt airplane department. I don't know what they officially called themselves, but it was Paul Mance and Frank Tallman, and they owned and ran all these airplanes in all these Hollywood movies, 30s, 40s, up through the 50s. And when their collection was dismantled, eventually we ended up inheriting this wing, which was in the movies, but because it doesn't have an end number painted on it, because there's no more fabric, we can't be sure exactly which movie it was in. But we know a whole bunch of movies from that period that it could have been in, and we just have to guess. So come to one of our movie nights sometime, and you can see it in action, and we can all guess which one it is. I like to say aviation is for everyone. Wherever you are in the United States, abroad, please come visit us. We're less than 2 hours from Chicago. We're less than 2 hours from Milwaukee. We're close to Madison. We're right on the state line of Wisconsin and Illinois, and we would love to have you. I have met people here, coming here to learn about aviation from every continent except Antarctica. So if you live in Antarctica, please come so I can check that off the list.